The views reflected by any of the guests may not reflect the views of the podcast host. Some topics may be difficult for some listeners. Proceed at your own risk. This podcast does not replace psychotherapy or advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Today we're going to be speaking with Tomoko. She shares her story about being sent to the USA from Japan when she was only 12 and not knowing anyone. We discuss how her experience shaped her life, her work, and her perspective. Tomoko is an MFT intern, marriage family therapist, working at Spill the Tea Cafe and Explore in Honolulu. Spill the Tea Cafe specializes in mental health care for youth, with a special emphasis on supporting gender diverse and LGBTQ+ teens. If you are in Honolulu, please check them out. We'll be right back after this short break. Stories of hope, healing, and resilience. I'm your host, Christina McKelvey. Today we have Tomoko here today, and I repeated myself and I said today twice. Sorry, listeners, but you know what? It has been a day. It is 4:11. And Tomoko, what time is it where you're at?
It is 1:11.
Oh, and you're in the middle of the Pacific.
Hawaii.
Yes, in Hawaii. Oh, Hawaii. I love it. That's where I'm from too. We're from different islands.
Yeah.
But I'm no longer in Hawaii. I am in Arizona and it's hot.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be hot where I'm at. So how are you doing, Tomoko?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
No, of course. I'm really excited to talk to you. So I met you when we were volunteering for the Hawaii crisis responders for the Lahaina fires.
Yes.
And we were on a team for an hour, you, myself, and a professor from the Midwest somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah, he actually sent me some of his website, and he did a lot of studies on resilience. It was amazing studies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I met you, and we didn't really have anyone show up for us for our crisis group, and so we got to know each other, and I heard a little bit about your story, what you shared, and I found it very fascinating. And I wanted to, I invited you on. So thank you so much for, telling the world or the handful of listeners I have your story. And so let's start, with tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your background, and we can go from there.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Japan. Tokyo is where I grew up. I am a middle child of 3 children. I have an older brother, or had one. He was 2 years older than me, and a younger sister who's 5 years younger. Most of my family, my immediate families, they all still live in Japan. I grew up there until I was 12. And at 12, I was sent to California alone to initially live with a relative. Live with relatives for several years to learn English. But I ended up in a boarding school by the age of 13.
Did you know that you were going to go into a boarding school when you first moved to California to live with your family?
So, an interesting side note, I'm sorry, I don't mean to rear off on this,
That's
but
okay.
I don't know. Have you heard of the comedian or up and coming? She's getting a lot of traction now these days. Her name is Atsuko Katsuka.
Yes, she's hilarious.
Yeah, she is amazing. She recently came to Hawaii, and I had to go see her. And she shared her story of being kidnapped, quote unquote kidnapped. She said, and made it into a comedy skit. She was taken from Tokyo, Japan, to California when she was 8, I believe. So the similarity in our stories are just incredible. And, and the timing that I heard about her story was incredible. I thought I would just kind of throw that in there.
Yeah, no, so very similar.
Yeah. And it's just, obviously I've never met anyone who's, left Japan to the United States in the way that I did. So I thought that was really interesting. I would love to talk to her one day. But anyway, yeah, so actually I didn't. And the interesting thing is that I think I was probably like maybe 11, close to 12. My mom just basically said, "Hey, you're gonna go to school in the United States. You're gonna live in California. You're gonna live with with your relatives," and that was it. So it was almost like presented as if like, "Hey, we're going to the store." You know, there were no preparations. They didn't ask me questions. They didn't ask me to ask them questions.
Wow.
No English lessons. I didn't know how to speak English, write, read, nothing. Not a bit. And I was 11, 12 years old. I had no idea what to expect or how to even prepare mentally for this. All I knew was that I visited there before. I visited my relatives. It was fun when I visited. So I went with that mentality of like, oh, okay, it's going to be fun.
Yeah. Was the boarding school that you went to, was it only in English or did they teach in Japanese?
Yeah.
So you didn't know English. You know how to write English in English.
No.
You didn't know how to speak in English. And then
No.
you're thrown into a school in California.
Yeah. So I initially lived with my family or relatives, and then attended an elementary school. So I graduated from elementary school in Japan and then was sent away. I attended an elementary school in California while living with my relatives. I remember like just holding an English Japanese dictionary and just walking around pointing to things. That's how I could, that was the only way I could communicate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very obviously very difficult adjustment because I had to adjust to the environment, people, saying goodbye to everything I knew, lifestyle, culture, even the way the way I ate or things I ate were different. I went from like eating rice every day to, meat and potatoes and things like that. So just that alone was a huge adjustment. But I had to go through every other kind of adjustment you could imagine.
Wow. At 12 years old.
At 12 years old, yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's big shock.
It is. And you mentioned, the comedian. You mentioned
Atsuko.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And, she had a similar story. I know,
Yes.
I think she went to live with her grandma.
Yes.
And she didn't know, she thought it was a vacation, and her mother, I believe, had or has schizophrenia.
Yes.
And I'm curious, it sounds like her story is one of the only stories you've heard that's similar to yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So,
yeah. Yeah, it was just interesting to hear because it's my story is still very rare. So to hear her on the stage tell her story that's very similar, and of all the places in the United States, she also moved to California. I think it was Southern California also. And for me, so it was sort of a cathartic moment for me to hear that story.
You knew you were alone.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm wondering how that felt, that at 12 years old, how that can feel, the confusion. It sounded like you didn't know why, you weren't expecting anything, you were thrown into this, what that does for you then, and also what it does for you now. When you think about that.
Yeah. I've had a lot of different moments to process everything on different levels at different age. I feel like I'm finally in a space where I am very comfortable talking about it. I'm okay to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm actually writing a book about it, about my life.
Nice.
Hoping that I can help others in overcoming trauma. childhood trauma. And so in a sense, I feel like I'm in a really good place, but I I've had to process them in different stages, even as recent as this past year. And sometimes I will have memories thinking about what happened back then, and I cry for who I was, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
What did that look like? Like, how did you mentioned this getting into the space, like you're now in the space
hmm
where you can talk about it, where you can process it. And you said
Yeah.
it kind of happened in stages. Tell me a little bit more
hmm
about that, like what those stages looked like for you.
Okay. So I'll also build it. So,
Yeah.
like, leaving, being sent away at 12, that is just a small part of this traumatic childhood that I had, on top of not being properly prepared or, talked about how my life would change,
Mm-hmm.
um, and being thrown into the situation literally. But I went from an abusive house situation to another abusive situation,
Okay.
living with my relatives, and then I eventually escaped. And I think I lived there for 7 months, whereas I was supposed to, or I was told I would live there until I finished middle school, and then from high school I would attend boarding school because I would mature by then, I would know English by then. And so the plans were abruptly changed in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of 3 years, 7 months later, I left my relative's house and I was supposed to go back home briefly, but I couldn't due to my
Mm-hmm.
student visa situation. So I was placed in a foster system and lived with a foster family who was again not very kind. And still my English was, 7 months. My English was very broken. Now I'm living with strangers, not very nice. And my
Mm-hmm.
first, I spent my first Christmas away from my family and home
Mm-hmm.
with strangers who were abusive. So it's like there were layers of abuse that took place by the time I was 13. And so, I started attending boarding school maybe 6 months after, in January, after I turned 13.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course this school was very difficult because it was middle school and high school.
That can be
Um,
difficult. Yeah.
oh my gosh. And I was
Yeah.
the youngest at the school.
Mm.
Still, my English was very broken. Gosh, I was bullied. There was a lot of racism that I experienced. So it's just,
Mm-hmm.
layers and layers of a lot of difficult times, traumatic events. And I had to deal with all of them and come to terms with them at that moment in a way that I could with my very undeveloped brain,
Mm-hmm.
at 14, 15. So in that sense, it had to take different stages and over many decades for me to process them because I mean, gosh, I had CPT, I developed CPTSD, which I wasn't diagnosed for decades after. I didn't even know. Yeah.
I think it's
And
even a relatively new term,
yeah,
CPTSD.
right, right. Yeah. I didn't know about it until really
Mm-hmm.
recent, like several years ago
Complex
myself.
PTSD.
Complex PTSD, right? I realized I had PTSD, you know, many years later because I would have flashbacks. I would have I had very, very bad anxiety, depression, all of everything, all
Yeah.
of the above on the list of PTSD symptoms.
Yeah. If it was
So it,
listed, you had it.
I'm sorry?
If it was listed, you had it.
Yes,
Pretty
exactly.
much. Yeah. Mm.
Right. And so, yeah, I feel like it had to take over, it had to happen over the years,
Mm-hmm.
the processing and healing of it. And really, I feel like I want to say it took me, one, I had to make a really strong determination that I'm going to focus on healing and focus on working on myself and my pain and all the unhealthy attachments and personalities that I've developed over the years because of my childhood trauma. So it really took, I would say, at least 15 years, maybe more,
Mm-hmm.
to of constantly working on healing. And I've tried everything. Read read all the books,
Mm-hmm.
wrote everything, meditation, acupuncture, chiropractic, therapy. I mean, just all kinds of different methods of healing. And they all did part in getting me to heal and to get me to where I am today.
They all had a part.
Yeah, I would say so. It has to be very holistic. I think
Mm.
so. Yeah.
I'm glad you pointed that out, that,
Mm-hmm.
it has to be holistic.
Mm-hmm.
Because you mentioned again that you had to heal, you healed in parts,
Mm-hmm.
and it took 15 years. Started off like when you're 12, just kind of figuring out what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the years, reading, writing, understanding, getting that diagnosis of complex PTSD, understanding that. And it's like for a lot of us, I feel like trauma, we're never like fully healed from trauma.
Yeah.
We're learning to navigate with our trauma, navigate life with trauma.
Right.
And you mentioned it has to be holistic. There's not just one thing that works. So what
Mm-hmm.
did that the holistic approach look like for you? Because you said chiropractic,
Oh gosh.
acupuncture,
Yeah.
writing, yeah,
Writing,
therapy.
reading, therapy,
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, herbal. I mean, really, kinesiology. I mean, if you've
Mm-hmm.
mentioned any type of healing methods, I've tried it. I've tried the Western way of using medication, and then I
Mm-hmm.
used more holistic way, like homeopathic remedy, essential oils, and flower essence. I mean, like I tried everything
Yeah.
because I really, really just wanted to get out of this dark, dark place that I felt like was really slowly killing me. And I didn't want, but at the same time, I didn't want to give up on life. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many times where I thought, why? Like what's the point? But I really just firmly believed in deserving to live a good life.
Mm-hmm.
And I slowly started to shift my mindset really slowly and at my pace. And that's why it takes 15 plus years to heal from trauma like this. You really need to take your time. And the biggest thing I realized I had to do, and what ultimately saved my life, is that I have to do this myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to own things. I have to believe in myself. I had to like basically rewire the way I thought. Just the way I saw the world. I had to shift all of that. Yeah.
So you had to shift your thinking, your beliefs.
Oh yeah. In
Mm.
so many ways. And meditation and affirmation and things like that really, really, I mean, it takes time. It's
Yeah.
it's a practice, just like going to the gym, just like practicing sports or yoga or whatever. It's you slowly build it and
Mm-hmm.
slowly shift your mindset, because what trauma does, and one of the worst things traumatic events or like abuse can do, especially when you experience them as a child, is that it it creates the world and the views and perspectives for you. So if you were traumatized, if you were neglected, if you were abused, then that's the set of lens you're going to see the entire world for the rest of your life in, unless you heal from them or, really heal and change the perspectives yourself and the belief system yourself. And I feel like that's where a lot of people struggle, because we want somebody else to fix it, right? Like we want the therapist to fix it, the doctor to fix it, the medicine to fix it. But ultimately, it's really up to you. It's hard work. I can tell you that. It's hard work. You have to be patient. You have to be most patient with yourself. But once you get there, it's really incredible. Life really changes. And yeah.
Part of healing from trauma is finding ways to shift your perspective or change the way you see the world, like you mentioned. I know earlier I mentioned I don't feel that we can fully heal from our trauma. What I meant to say is the term get over it, or things like that. 'Cause when I think of healing, I also think of like scars, like the scars healed, but you might still have remnants of it.
Definitely. Yeah. And so I think, and I totally agree with you. It's the way I see it is more like when you're traumatized and you can't get over it and you struggle because you have these terrible aftermath mindsets and the way you react to things and the way you hurt, the way you take things. It's almost like your wound is just not healing and you're walking around with all these cuts.
Yeah.
But once you heal, or once you are in a better place, there are scars, but they don't hurt anymore, And so, yes, definitely you still have scars. Some days you still, some days I still cry and remember and even react to things. But now that I've done the work for so many years, there's more subtle, like calmness to my reaction, because I'm not reacting from this fearful, anxious place. And that's, I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm trying to get licensed in MFT, and that's how I try to help my clients, to help them to lessen calm their nervous system. Because without calming your nervous system, it's really difficult to come out of trauma or trauma mindset.
You're always hyper vigilant. You're reacting.
Yes.
Yeah. I will say you're very calm.
Thank you. Yeah. It didn't happen overnight. My kids can tell you.
Not having kids, I'm sure, is, has its own stories and own anxieties.
Oh yes.
I'm wondering how being a mom has played into your perspective, since you're sent away as a child, and you mentioned you had trauma even before. And the people that you were supposed to care for you and you were supposed to trust, you could not. So I'm curious how being a mom has shifted your perspective, or what that was like for you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you asking me that, because that is a huge part. And I didn't know until I experienced it and my therapist mentioned it, that, people often relive their trauma through their kid. And that's exactly what happened. And it freaked me out, because I'm like, what is happening? What's going on? Why am I reacting this way? I really had adverse reactions like when my oldest son turned 12 or was about to turn 12, I was having major anxiety, just worrying and overthinking, and I had no idea what was going on until my therapist said, I think this is connected to, your experience, and you're reliving it through him. And so your anxiety is heightened. And I'm like, that makes total sense.
Because you were 12.
Yes.
With that big
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And so there were a lot of reliving moments. I also lost my brother when I was 16 and he was 18 in a car accident. So I relived that through my oldest son. And then a lot more subtle because of where I am now. But in a sense, I'm reliving it again through my second son because he's getting close to the age that my brother died. And everybody, I mean, including myself, he reminds us the most of my brother. He looks like my brother. He acts like my brother. And so it can be very heavy sometimes just looking at him, both, in a negative and positive way. Negative way, it's like being reminded of the loss. But then also positive is that we sort of get to see his life through my son in an interesting spiritual way, I guess. And so there's a lot of mixed emotions. And of course, as an abused, I was pretty severely abused as a child, physically, mentally. And so I knew that when I had 3 children, or before I had children, I was like, okay, I gotta make sure I don't become, this an abusive parent. And then when I birthed 3 children, I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta really make sure. That was um, another big reason why I decided to focus on my healing, because I knew that I did not want to repeat, because, when I studied psychology, the statistics of abused person becoming an abuser the percentage was so high. And I also made many mistakes as a parent, and I wanted to correct them. I wanted to be better. I wanted to raise healthy children. So it took a lot of discipline, a lot of determination to focus on that as a mother.
You wanted to break that generational cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really needed to. Yeah. And I feel like the beautiful thing about it, now that I am where I am, is that I somehow knew that knowing that, and doing something about it is huge, right? Like I can even say that for myself. It's huge. It is not an easy path to, and it is a path that you have to choose, because it has to be determined. It has to be something you say, I am going to do this, and I'm going to consciously work on this. And knowing that somewhere inside, I believe that I could.
Yeah.
I feel like that's huge too. And then, I mean, yes, I made many, many mistakes, and parenting is still very, very challenging. But I feel like for the most part, I've done a lot better than had I not made that determination to break the cycle. And so, yeah, I feel very proud of that.
Yeah, you made that choice.
Yeah, it was super hard.
It can be, there's a lot of barriers sometimes for individuals. Like maybe they want to make that choice, but there's something that gets in the way.
And also, societal expectations and people not knowing what I've been through. And me feeling like I need to live up to everybody's expectation. Just all kinds of mess. It's a lot. It's a lot of complicated stuff that that takes place. I think any mother could relate to it. Yeah.
Those expectations, you need to live up to them. I mean, because being sent away at 12, I know when I was 12, I was always people pleasing, still am to an extent, and at that age, you're so impressionable. So being sent away, like what messages, does that 12-year-old self receive, and how does that carry on, like you said, through your belief system, how you see the world, parenting, everything like that.
Definitely. Yeah, it affects everything in your life, and not just your childhood, but years and decades later. So it's very complicated, and you have to like essentially undo all of that, basically, in order to heal, and there's a lot of growth in that too, of course, as hard as it is. So yeah, it was very, very difficult and very long path, but I'm really glad I chose it.
Yeah, and now you're here.
Yeah, and I'm here. This is wonderful.
Like getting and working on your MFT, which is marriage and family therapy. Yeah.
It's when I was in college during my senior year studying psychology at University of Hawaii at Manoa, I dropped out because of my CPTSD, and I was not diagnosed at that time, and so there was a lot of internalizing happening. Oh my gosh, my anxiety was way up there, my depression, I was reacting to everything. I used to tell people, it's almost like walking around and not having any skin. Anything that brushes against me hurt.
Your nerves are raw, exposed.
It was exposed and raw. And that was the only way to help others understand what it's like to be me. And I feel like I would still use that. That's how difficult life was at that moment. I was 22, 23. Dropped out. Senior year, I didn't even know. I didn't even know until many, many years later when I decided to go back to school and I'm like, I should finish getting my bachelor's. I only had one class. So I did that back in 2017. I got my, bachelor's degree in psychology finally after all the years. And I'm actually really glad I did it the way I did, because had I become a therapist back, in my 20s, I would have probably been a mess, because, it just, you really have to heal from your trauma if you want to help others. You can't help others until you help yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad. And then I just continued with it. I'm like, I never ever thought I would get my master's. I never thought I was capable or smart enough, all the things on the list. But like, oh, maybe I can. And I did it. I graduated, and yeah, I'm really, really glad I did it the way it did. I mean, sitting with a bunch of 20-something-year-olds was very intimidating. I'm like, oh, I'm Auntie here. Hi, like
I'm Auntie.
Yeah, these brilliant young people, and I'm going to school, and I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit late in the game, but I'm trying. But again, I'm really glad the way that I'm doing it the way I am, because it's such an incredible work, and I feel a lot more comfortable doing it. The session,
because like you said, you healed, or you're healing. Yeah.
And I feel like I'm in a good place to tell people, or I shouldn't say tell people, because that's not what my job is as a therapist, but like guide them through their challenges. I feel like I'm in a much better place to provide the guidance. I always tell my clients, just think of me as a GPS, and I will help you get to I'm just a GPS helping you from get from A to B. if there's an accident, I'll find you a better path,
Yeah.
but I'm not here to tell you what to do so I'm a much better GPS than I would have been in my 20s.
In your 20s, you would have been the beta GPS.
Yeah.
Guiding
The
into the
AOL version.
The AOL version. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Did you ever find out, or why you were sent to the United States?
Yeah, I did. That's an interesting thing too. In my 30s, I did have a moment where I was able to kind of confront my parents. And
Oh.
basically, what happened was when I was living in Japan, I was sent to a very prestigious school, all girls, Japan Women's University. But it's almost like like Punahou here, right?
Yeah.
It's from preschool all the way to this one is all the way to university. Punahou is high school, but it's a very like if you get in, you're set. And my mom went there, and she wanted me and my sister to go there. We got in, but it was really difficult. It's one of the top schools in Japan. If you mention, oh yeah, I went to the school, everybody in Japan knows where that is. Very, very, very difficult school. When I attended there, because of the situation at home, nobody helped me. I was on my own, whereas all my classmates, this is a type of school where all the parents are hands on with every homework, every prep for tests, exams, and all that. I didn't have any of that. So I failed a lot, which is not acceptable. It's a very, very typical Japanese system type of school, but like on steroid kind of thing. It's very cookie cutter. If you are not getting straight A's, then you're not meeting their expectations. I definitely wasn't. Nobody helped me. Not once anybody helped me with homework from first grade to sixth grade. So basically, at sixth grade, you transition into middle school, and it's another campus. And your parents meet with the principal, and they'll tell you, okay, you're transitioning, or I'm sorry, you're not good enough. And basically, the school was like, yeah, Tomoko is not good enough. And I didn't know that. My mom didn't tell me.
Until your 30s.
Yeah, when I asked her.
Wow.
So the way the way I've interpreted it is that she was too ashamed to tell people that I got kicked out. But if she said, oh my gosh, she's going to school in the United States, it sounds fabulous. And instead of, because, and, I feel like my perception about it is correct, because if it was with more positive intentions, she, I would think she would have explained why I was going to the United States. She would have prepared me better. I would have at least had English lessons, or, been able to ask questions. I really basically had to pry that out of her. And she finally got very upset and said, well, you got kicked out. And I was like, oh, gosh, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
And so instead of sending me to a public school for middle school, she chose to send me away.
And you said that you feel that it was more of a pride for her on herself.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I was able at that point to tell her, well, because of this decision, and because I didn't know anything about it, I struggled. And then I also went through a lot of abuse, bullying. I was also molested when I was 14. So like all these things happened, by the time I was 16, I've had so much trauma happen in my life that but it was so difficult that it took a long time for me to confront my family.
Yeah.
And of course, when I would try to, it was very not a Japanese girl thing to do, to confront your parents, It's seen as very disrespectful. So none of my statements were taken well, or taken properly, I guess. So that was hard, but I navigated through those things over the years and overcame them.
Yeah. Having that discussion with your mom sounds like it was one of those pieces for your healing, one of the parts for your healing.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this then because it did take, I think I was about 33, 35 maybe, but it took another 10 plus years to be where I am now, realize that was still a very toxic moment.
Yeah.
Because she initially denied, kind of played like, I don't know why I sent you. And I would say, well, you threw me away. That's how I see it. You threw me away. And she's like, oh my gosh, no, I didn't throw you away. I'm like, so why did you send me away? And I pushed it. I can be like that. I'm like, no,
you were determined. You were determined to find out why that happened to you, because it shaped your perspective. It shaped your life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I pushed her enough that she got very upset and kind of blurted out. I don't think she had intentions to tell me. And when she blurted out, it was obviously a very shock for me to hear because I had no idea I had been kicked out. And I was like, I don't know, I guess it, in a sense, at that moment, it confirmed, I don't think like this anymore. But back then, like, gosh, I must not be good enough, or I must be disposable because my parents don't love me. That mindset, I lived in that mindset for a very, very long time. So that sort of confirmed that, like, oh, I got kicked out. Even the school didn't want me, and then it forced my parents to throw me away. And so it was very traumatic again, in a sense. Like, it just, things were confirming that I'm worthless. Yeah. That was very painful.
How did you navigate that?
In that conversation, it blew up into a huge argument, only because my mother lost her temper and I just had to walk away. But it was a lot of tension after that and a lot of anxiety that came up. So, like, triggering my PTSD. I think that was, in hindsight, that's what was happening. A lot of nightmares, a lot of anxiety, a lot of crying, and then just going through the depression. I mean, gosh, I've had so many depression. I don't have it anymore. But back then it would easily come up. Just any kind of those types of moments would trigger my depression. And it would be anywhere from like 2 weeks to weeks before I could snap back out of it. But interestingly, I was really good at putting a happy face. So I could do that. And I assure you, I'm not doing that right now. I'm not putting a happy face. I'm really happy.
Yeah.
And so,
oh, that's good.
That's a huge difference. It's a huge, huge difference. Back then, I got very good at putting the facade. People believed I was a very happy person. They knew I was struggling here and there, but not to the extent of I was. I don't think people had any idea. But yeah, again, the 15, 20 years of healing really closed a lot of that. Yeah.
Tomoko, it's interesting to hear your story, because what I hear is that it took time. Healing takes time, and it takes trying many different things and being okay with, oh, this didn't work, so I'm going to try this. Yep. Oh, I'm going to confront one of the people that instigated that trauma. Oh, okay, that might have not worked for that moment, but in the future, maybe it did help. And, so I love hearing that journey, and it's so real, because I think many of us that have gone through trauma, that is our experience, is it takes time, and you have to figure out the different things that work for you. Yes. Speaking of time, we're getting close to time. And one thing that helps a lot of people, with their journey with trauma or healing, even moving forward, is hope. And that's why my podcast is called Hopeology, because I love hearing stories of hope, healing, and resilience, which you have spoken about a lot, is that resilience that you have. Yeah. And so I want to ask, and I ask the same question to all my guests. And I got this idea from a friend who did a podcast, and he would ask a question at the end of his episodes too. And so I like to ask, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? I mean, there are many things, but one thing that really gave me hope for my healing journey was that I'm capable of changing, that I can rewire my mind system, my thought process. I just have to really believe in myself and give myself credit. And there's a lot of hope in that I can change. Things can change.
Wow. You are capable of changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the hope for you.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I really appreciated this conversation. And I know you also have a nonprofit. What's that name of your nonprofit?
Oh, I don't have a nonprofit. It's not registered as 501c3. I just do these projects every year.
That's right.
Yeah. One is called Stuff a Purse Project. I collect gently used purses and collect sanitary items for donations. I do it for my birthday every year, invite all my girlfriends. I cook for them. I love to cook. So I cook for them, we talk story, and then we stuff all the bags with sanitary items and toiletries. And we've been donating them to incredible nonprofits like Money Movement, and other houseless projects that help houseless teens, girls. Because there's another story behind that. Maybe I can share next time.
Yes, I want you back for sure.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So yeah, I do. I love volunteering. I try to volunteer as much as I can.
And that instills hope in the people that you're serving, but also I feel there's, it helps us too, when we volunteer.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Well, thank you for being on here, and let me know when your book is out. And like I said, I'd love to have you back on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and listening to my story. Thank you.
Yes, of course. I hope you enjoyed listening to Tomoko's story. And it's just incredible to hear the resilience she had as a young girl, and later circling back, with her family to ask questions and try and get that closure. You can find more information about Tomoko in the show notes, And also, as I mentioned, she really wants to promote Spill the Tea Cafe, which again serves LGBTQ and gender diverse youth in Honolulu. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a review, share it. Also consider supporting the show. This is a passion project. It's just me. And if you would like to be on the podcast and you have a story to share, feel free to email me at hopeologypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you. And tomorrow. Thank you for listening to Hopeology. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave us a review. To learn more about us or listen to past episodes, you can find us on all your podcast streaming stations. If you are interested in being a guest, or if you have any feedback, please email us at hopeologypodcast@gmail.com. You can also support our show by clicking on the link in our show notes. Please also follow our Instagram page, Hopeology Podcast, and visit our website, www.hopeologypodcast.com.